Hey, what's up, people? This TV is an Insignia model number NS40D420NA16, and I've got a quick little challenge for you. I'd like you to take a few seconds and just kind of look at the back of the TV and see if you could tell me why this TV is not working. All right, you ready? You have your answer? All right, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but you've been bamboozled, for, as a matter of fact, this TV is actually working.
See, I pulled a sneaky on you.
It's been on for a while, so it's about to shut off. Let's go back to the back of it. Now, if your answer was, nah, dog, that TV is working totally fine, well, then you would have been correct. One thing you may have noticed is that on that board, if we zoom in, you may have noticed that there appears to be a small electrical dingleberry dangling off the side of the board. And why is that? Well, that there is our clue as to what was wrong with this board and why the TV actually used to not work, but now it does. So let's remove this board and we'll take it over to the bench and we'll take a better look at it. And here we've got the board on the bench. And so what are we looking at? Well, this little thing happens to be a Texas Instruments PTH08080 WAN, and that's a adjustable switching regulator. So it takes a DC voltage and it'll regulate it to whatever you set it to by way of a resistor that normally would be maybe like mounted on the board. In my case, I've actually put that little tiny resistor on the board itself with some like Kynar wire. So what is that doing in this spot on the board? Well, it's actually replacing this other little electrical doodad. So what is this then? Well, this is an AP2114H-3.3 TRG1, and it's a low dropout 3.3 volt regulator. So the problem with this TV was that this regulator was bad, and I didn't have one on hand, so I just took something that I happened to have on hand, and I just wired it into the location where this would have normally been to see if the TV would work, and sure enough, that took care of the issue. The only problem is that I don't really want to have this thing dangling off the side of this board, and so it would be ideal to replace this regulator with one that actually could go on the board, and I tried to do that. I ordered these. This is an AP2114HA-3.3 TRG1, and while it is a 3.3 volt regulator, unfortunately the pinout is not exactly the same. Now, the funny part is that I'm actually recording this video on the 3rd of May of 2024, and it turns out that I ordered these parts on the 3rd of May of 2022, so it's been exactly 2 years since I ordered these parts, and I totally did not even plan it this way, but I didn't notice it until I pulled the bag out that it had been exactly 2 years to the day, so total coincidence there. But unfortunately, I don't have the proper component to put in that spot, which means that I'm going to have to order some.
2 weeks later.
Fast forwarding about 2 weeks, and we've got new parts. Now, I did realize that I failed to make a mention as to what the symptoms of a bad component actually were. So I've got the board just kind of minimally reassembled onto the back of the TV. And as you can see, I've removed the voltage regulator that I had attached in place of the bad one. And I've got the TV plugged into power. And so the LED that's down at the bottom of where the IR sensor is on. So this means that the main board is getting some power from the power supply. And I did check all the voltages coming from the power supply before I went to try to figure out what the heck was going on with the actual board. And this little panel that's normally attached to the side is where the power button is. So when we push the power button, the set just does not power on. And, this LED just kind of remains red like that. So that's what it does. The TV looks like it's going to work, but when you push the power button, nothing actually happens. So the way I determined that that regulator was bad was, first of all, I checked to make sure that all the voltages coming from the main power supply through this set of cables were all present on this side of the board. And having confirmed that all the voltages were present, it was mostly a hunch, to be honest. I kind of started checking these regulators because there was that one regulator in that spot. And then there's another regulator in this other spot. So one of the pins was going to be ground, one was going to be the input voltage, and then was going to be the output voltage. I realized that this one was getting an input voltage, but there was nothing coming out of the output. And by taking my negative lead and grounding it to the chassis, and taking the positive lead and touching it to where the input would be, which is the furthest up, we can see that the voltage coming in is 5 volts. So I realized that there was no 3.3 volt output on that regulator. The way I realized that I had actually ordered the incorrect part number the first time around is I actually started trying to hunt down the original component that I removed from the board, the bad regulator, which was this one that's marked GH12E. And so to make sure that this was the regulator that I had removed from the board, I wanted to compare it with the bag of the new components that I had. And that was this other regulator that's marked GH14F. And I realized, like, wait a second, they're similar, but why does this one say 14F and this one says 12E? So I looked up the data sheet to double check and make sure that maybe this was like a direct replacement for this part. And so when I looked at the data sheet, here we go. This is the base part number is AP2114. When I scrolled down and I looked at the pinouts, I realized that this H part has the correct pinout, which is the VN on pin number 3, V out on pin number 2, and then ground on pin number 1. And then I saw that there was this HA, which has the V out on pin number 3, and then ground on 2 and V in on 1. So I started becoming a little suspicious because I noticed that the part that I had on the bag said HA. So I went down to the ordering information, and in this list, I looked for the part numbers that are actually printed on the actual device package, and we can see that we've got GH12E, and that corresponds with the H labeled parts. However, the one that I had was GH14F, so even though this is also a 3.3 volt regulator, we can see that these parts are marked or designated with an HA for the different pinout. So I'm guessing what happened was when I ordered it, I looked for the 3.3 volt regulator with that base part number, not realizing that there was two different pinout types. And so this must have been one of the first ones that popped up, and that's why I selected it. And I'm kind of glad that I caught this before I actually installed the regulator on the board, because I guess worst case scenario, I could have like fried something. Best case scenario, like it wouldn't have worked at all, and I could have just replaced it and it would have been fine. But I would have been scratching my head like, why isn't this working? This is the right regulator. And I already knew that it would work with a replacement 3.3 volt regulator. So yeah, a little bit of a trap there that I kind of fell into. But now, since we do have the correct regulators, let's go ahead and install one on the board. And I just need to clean off the rest of this old solder from where I removed the little regulator board that I had installed, just to make it so that the new part sits pretty flat. And just clean this up just a little. And so here we got the new GH12E numbered part. And I'm wondering if the reason why this failed is maybe it gets kind of hot and it doesn't have enough heat sinking. So after I install it, we'll let it sit on for a while, and then we'll check the temperature and see what sort of temps it's running out. Put a little squeeze of solder, or not solder, flux on the tab. Okay, I got a little touch of solder on the tip of the soldering iron. Just going to tack that down. Make sure it attaches properly. And let's finish up the other 3 pins now. Flux is your friend. You should have used a smaller tip in this area. These capacitors are sticking up quite a bit, even though it doesn't look like it on video. But, there we go. That should be good enough. Just going to double check and make sure that they actually flowed all the way down to the pad. I think it did. And there we go. That's supposed to cleaned up. I don't think there was a component in that spot, but I'm going to double check just to make sure before I try anything. Okay, no, there wasn't anything there. So everything should be good to go. We can put this back into the TV and see if it'll power up. And once again, I've got the board just sort of minimally reattached to the case of the TV. And we can check the voltage on that and make sure that it's actually working. So the TV right now, the set is powered off. But the voltage regulator, if we touch this ground to this USB port casing, and then we touch the positive to the tab of that new regulator, we can see that we've got just a little bit over 3.3 volts. So that is working totally fine. And as we can see, even with the TV not powered on, that voltage regulator is doing some regulation. So at this point, everything should be fine. The TV should turn on. Let's give that a shot. All right, TV's plugged in. We can see that we've got the red LED on in the corner, and I'm going to hit the power button on the side. And the TV should come to life. There we go. We saw the TV, or the LED down at the bottom is blinking, and there it is. So That should come up. There it goes. So it's set to the component input. I mean, whatever, but there was nothing wrong with any of the inputs. It was just the TV would not power on. So I'm going to let this sit for a little while. I'm going to let the regulator get all warm, see about how hot it gets. And then we're going to check the temperature of it with the thermal camera and see how hot it actually is. If it's not running hot at all, then that probably means that there was something like bad with that previous regulator. Maybe it was faulty. I don't know if the bad regulator on these TVs is like a common thing. So I guess we'll see. And just so the TV doesn't shut down on us, I've hooked up my microscope to one of the HDMI inputs. And I have the lens focused in on the bad regulator. This way the TV can just show us a static image of its failures. The TV has been sitting here powered on for way over an hour now. And even though we can't see the screen, we can tell that it's on because the backlight is kind of shining through that little opening. And we can check the temperatures on these regulators. This is the actual like plastic package. It's sitting at just under like 60 degrees Celsius. I tried to color in the tab so that I could maybe like measure it a little more accurately. I put some permanent marker on it, but it didn't really seem to help. It's still like reflective, and that's why it kind of looks darker. Yeah, 60, it's pretty toasty, but it's not like crazy bad. Okay, I had to reposition the camera. I was like fighting with the glare like way too much, but we can see that the main scaler, the temperature on that is about almost 70 degrees. And then that other small regulator that was off to the side, that one is over 70 degrees. Like around there, that's probably like the hottest spot I can measure. So with the case on, these would obviously be getting like a bit warmer. But if I do a touch test, I can tell that for sure this regulator next to this HDMI port is definitely a lot hotter than the new one that I installed. So, I mean, I really don't know if this original regulator fell due to heat issues or if it was just kind of like faulty from the get-go and then eventually it just completely like failed. But as we saw, it's totally working fine now, so I'm just going to leave it like this. I'm going to put the rest of the screws that I removed back on. I'm going to put the nut for the cable connection in the back. And then I'm just going to do the boring part of putting the cover back on like off camera. But that's going to do it for this one. Maybe this information will help somebody out there. And so, yeah, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys around the bench.